My son and his wife locked my husband and me in the basement of our own home, shouting, "This is ours now." Sitting in the dampness, I heard my husband whisper, "Hush, they don't know what lies behind that wall." When they left, my husband moved a loose brick and showed me a secret he had kept for 39 years. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for joining me today. Before I begin my story, I would be very happy if you subscribed to the channel and left a comment writing which state or country you are listening from. It always warms my heart to see how far our stories travel. Enjoy listening. This house knows how to breathe. I know the rhythm of its breath, as well as my own. In the morning, when the first rays of the Georgia sun break through the old pecan trees in the garden, it takes a quiet, deep inhale, and dust motes dance in pillars of golden light. In the evening, it exhales, cooling down, and the old beams creak as if sighing, settling in for the night. I have lived here for 40 years. I have grown into these walls, or perhaps they have grown into me. My father-in-law, Cornelius's father, a man with a steady gaze and a wide soul, built this house. He built it not as a vacation home, but as a legacy, a place where his grandchildren and great-grandchildren would laugh, a place of strength. This morning, I was making soup as usual. Simple chicken broth with dumplings, the way my grandmother taught me. Cornelius eats almost nothing lately, but the aroma of chicken broth is so familiar, so like home, that it sometimes sparks a flicker of interest in him. I was cutting carrots into tiny, almost jewel-like cubes, remembering how I taught Trevant, our son, to do this. He was little, standing on a stool next to me, his chubby fingers clutching a safety knife. "Mama, I'm a chef," he would shout, and we would both laugh. That laughter still lives in the grain of the kitchen table. "That tasteless slop again, Miss Idella." The voice of Kessia, Trevant's wife, burst into my memories like a draft in a warm room. "We talked about this yesterday. The internet has a million recipes. Broccoli cream soup gazpacho. Can't you master something new? It's for Trevant. He needs proper nutrition." She stood leaning against the door frame in her acrid silk robe, arms crossed over her chest. She never called me Mom, only Ms. Idella, with a cold politeness that was worse than outright rudeness. I didn't turn around. I just kept stirring the broth. "Your husband loves this soup," I answered quietly. "And his father loves it." "Father doesn't understand anything anymore," she cut in. "But Trevant deserves better. They've been living with us for 3 years, ever since Cornelius had his first stroke. At first, it seemed right. Families should be together, especially in hard times. I gave them the entire second floor, the master suite with the balcony overlooking the garden. Cornelius and I moved downstairs to his former study, so he wouldn't have to climb the stairs. Gradually, their things, their habits, their smells, Kessia's sharp perfume, Trevant's tart cologne, began to displace the air of this house. Last week, she moved grandfather's armchair without asking, the one with the worn armrests where my father-in-law used to read the Savannah Tribune. She shoved it into the darkest corner and hoisted some soulless, white contraption of metal and leather into its place. "It doesn't fit the modern interior," she threw over her shoulder at me. I said nothing then. I just went downstairs at night when everyone was asleep and stroked the old cracked leather of the chair the way one pets a faithful old dog. I remember how Trevant used to fall asleep in it in his grandfather's arms. How I sat in it myself while pregnant, reading history books, dreaming of returning to my work at the archives when my son grew up a bit, but he kept growing. And then came Cornelius with his career, demanding constant attention, and my dream quietly gathered dust like old tomes in the attic. Cornelius lay in the study, staring at the ceiling. His body had weakened, but his mind sometimes flared with its former clarity, like an ember in a dying fire. I walked over, sat down next to him, and took his hand. His skin was dry and thin, like parchment. "How are you, my love?" I whispered. He slowly turned his head. His eyes focused on me. "They are noisy," he exhaled. Yes, they were always noisy. Their voices, their arguments about money, their loud laughter. All of it was alien to the quiet, grounded life of our home. Trevant came down for lunch. He didn't say hello, sat at the table, and immediately stared at his phone. I placed a bowl of soup in front of him. He pushed it away. Ma, we need to talk. Seriously. Cassia instantly materialized next to him, sitting opposite, folding her hands on the table. In her eyes was that predatory glint I had learned to recognize. It meant they were plotting something. We've been thinking with the inheritance and all these complications. Bureaucracy, Trevant began, not taking his eyes off the screen. Father is in such a state. To avoid problems later, you should sign the house over to me now. A deed of gift. It's just a formality to simplify everything. My chest went cold, not from the words themselves, but from the casualness with which they were spoken, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. No, I said, my voice didn't tremble. This house belongs to your father and me. As long as we are alive, everything stays as it is. Cassia leaned forward. You don't want to simplify things? You want your only son to run around government offices later, gathering certificates when, well, you understand. I understand everything, I replied, looking her straight in the eyes. And that is exactly why the answer is no. Trevant finally raised his head. There was no filial love in his gaze, only cold, angry irritation, as if I were not his mother, but an annoying obstacle in his path. I don't understand what the problem is. We live here. We take care of father. You live in my house. I take care of father. At that moment, Cornelius appeared in the doorway of the living room. He stood leaning against the jamb, breathing heavily. He must have heard everything. His gaze was surprisingly clear. He looked not at me, but at Trevant. You. His voice was weak, but every word rang in the ensuing silence. You are a disgrace to our name. A disgrace. That word struck Trevant like the crack of a whip. I saw his face contort. It wasn't just anger. It was the rage of a man touched in his sorest spot, his vanity, his right to bear the Dubois name, of which he was so proud. His whole life was built on that name. What? He screamed, jumping up so fast the chair fell with a crash. A disgrace. Are you out of your mind? I am the only one continuing this name. This house, it is mine by right. It should have always been mine. He stepped toward his father. I jumped up, standing between them. Trevant, stop. No. Enough. I am tired of this. His eyes were wild. This is ours now. He grabbed me by the shoulder, not painfully, but with authority, and shoved me aside. Then he grabbed his father under the arm. Cornelius was as weak as a rag doll. Trevant dragged us through the hallway to the heavy oak door leading to the basement. Trevant, what are you doing? I screamed, resisting. You'll have time to think about your behavior, he growled. He threw the door open, and the smell of dampness and cold earth hit our faces. He roughly shoved us inside onto the top step of the steep staircase. I barely held on to Cornelius to keep us from rolling down. The door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. The heavy bolt clicked from the outside. We were left in complete silence. Only my ragged breathing and the weak, raspy breathing of my husband beside me. I sank onto the cold stone step, clutching Cornelius to me. The tears wouldn't come inside. Everything had gone numb. Years of service, years of love. My whole life given to this boy, this house, this family. All of it ended here in this dark, damp basement. I was broken, shattered into pieces. And in this deafening silence, in this absolute darkness of despair, I heard my husband's quiet, tense whisper. He pressed his lips right to my ear, his words barely audible. Hush. They don't know what lies behind that wall. My husband's words pierced the gloom, and I froze, listening. Above our heads, Trevant's heavy, quick footsteps rang out, followed by Cassia's lighter, spattering tread. The front door slammed so hard a dull echo rolled through the basement. A moment of silence, and then came the sound of an engine starting, quickly moving away and fading. They were gone. We were left alone in the cold, ringing silence of our own home, locked in its stone belly. Help me, Cornelius rasped. His voice was weak, but there was a steely persistence in it I didn't recognize. I helped him up. His body was trembling from weakness and cold. Slowly, step by step, we descended the chipped stairs to the dirt floor. It smelled of the stale vegetables we used to store, damp clay, and oblivion. The only source of light was a thin strip breaking through from under the door upstairs. In this dim twilight, I could barely make out the shapes of old shelves covered in cobwebs and empty jars piled in the corner. Cornelius led me not to the shelves, but to the far wall, to the very masonry of the foundation. He leaned against the rough, damp stones, breathing heavily. "Here," he whispered. "Father showed me when I was 18. Said it was for the most extreme case. I thought it would never come." He ran his shoulder along the wall, searching for something by touch in the gloom. Finally, he stopped. "Here, press." I don't have the strength. I touched the stone where he pointed. One of the rough granite blocks seemed no different from the others. But when I pressed harder, it gave way, sliding inward with a quiet scraping sound. Behind it, a black square void opened up. Inside this niche, something dark lay hidden. I reached my fingers in and felt cold, smooth metal. It was a small tin box, an old tobacco tin, the kind popular in my childhood. I pulled it out. It was light, almost weightless. We returned to the steps and sat side by side. Cornelius took the box from me. His fingers struggled with the simple latch for a long time. Finally, with a quiet click, the lid opened. I expected to see anything. Old photographs, maybe a few gold coins hidden by my father-in-law for a rainy day. But inside there was nothing shiny. Only a few yellowed papers folded in four. Cornelius took out the top document and unfolded it. Even in this faint light, I saw the official seal and faded violet ink. It was a birth certificate. "Read it," Cornelius said. I took the paper. It was fragile as an autumn leaf. The name written in calligraphy was unfamiliar to me. Cassius Thorne, place of birth, a prison hospital in Mississippi, a place I had only heard terrible stories about. Mother's name, dashed out. Father's name, Orion Thorne. "I don't understand," I whispered, looking at my husband. "That's me," he said quietly. "That is my real name." Something snapped inside me. For 40 years, I had lived with Cornelius Dubois, son of the esteemed Dr. Dubois, heir to a famous family. And now, this fragile sheet of paper was telling me I didn't know the man I had shared a bed with, raised a son with, built a life with. He took out the next document, an adoption decree. Cassius Thorne, adopted by Citizen Dubois, Langston James. The new son is assigned the surname Dubois and the name Cornelius. Everything was certified with dry, official stamps. The last item in the box wasn't an official paper, but a letter written in the familiar, confident handwriting of my father-in-law. Cornelius handed it to me. "Son," I read mentally, struggling to make out the words in the dark. "If you are reading this, it means dark times have come and I am likely gone. I never told you the whole truth, fearing it would break your life. Your father, Orion Thorne, was a brilliant scientist, an honest and brave man. But in our country, honesty and courage often become a crime. He was slandered, labeled a threat to national security, a traitor, and he perished in prison. I was his friend and colleague. I promised him I wouldn't let his son be lost. I adopted you, gave you my name, my family, to protect you, to erase the brand of a traitor's son. Live with dignity, Cornelius. Wear the Dubois name with honor, but never forget whose blood flows in your veins. The blood of a brave man." I read to the end and slowly folded the letter. The cold that had started in the basement was now coming from within. It chilled me to the bone. All these years, Cornelius lived with this secret. He feared the shadow of the past. He protected a name that wasn't his by birthright. And Trevant, our son, he built his whole life, his entire pride on this name. He boasted of his grandfather, the doctor, his pedigree, his heritage, a heritage that didn't exist by blood. All the pain, all the humiliation of the last few years, all the insults I had swallowed like bitter medicine, all of it suddenly compressed into a single point in my chest. But it didn't explode in a scream or tears. It froze, turning into an icy, perfectly clear crystal. And in its cold facets, I saw everything with dazzling clarity. I was an archivist. I worked with documents, with facts, with histories people tried to forget or rewrite. I knew the value of truth locked in yellowed paper. And what I held now wasn't just a family secret. It was a weapon. It was power. Absolute, undeniable power. We sat in the dark for 2, maybe 3 hours. Time lost its flow. Cornelius dozed off, leaning his head on my shoulder, exhausted by the tension. I sat motionless, staring into the darkness, and my mind, for the first time in years, worked precisely and silently like a well-oiled machine. A plan formed itself, logical and cold. Finally, noise was heard upstairs. The bolt was slid back with a sharp scrape. The door flew open, and bright light hit my eyes. Trevant stood on the threshold. His face was smug. "Well, have you thought it over?" he asked with a sneer. "Father, do you feel bad? Should I call a nurse?" He was clearly playing at magnanimity. It was part of his game. "Yes," I said, rising. My voice sounded steady and calm, surprising even myself. "He needs care. Give me the phone. I'll make a call." He was momentarily confused by my submission but then smirked, handing me his mobile. "Here, one call to arrange a nurse, and no funny business." I took the device, its warmth contrasted with the cold of my fingers. I didn't search for a number in the contact list. I knew it by heart. A few years ago, I had read an article in Essence magazine about a female attorney specializing in complex family cases and inheritance. She was described as a brilliant and uncompromising specialist. I memorized her name just in case, and as it turned out, not in vain. I calmly dialed the number. Trevant looked down at me, expecting to hear my conversation with some caregiving service. A crisp female voice answered the phone. "Vita Sterling speaking." "Miss Sterling, good afternoon," I said just as evenly and clearly. "My name is Idella Dubois. I urgently need your help." I arranged a meeting with Vita Sterling and, without changing my expression, handed the phone back to my son. He took it with lazy curiosity, scrolling the screen to check who I had called. The number was unfamiliar without a name. He apparently decided it was a care agency, and complete satisfaction reflected on his face. He had won. The old mother was broken and submitted. "Good girl," he tossed out, more to himself than to me. "A sensible decision. Come on, Cassia, let's help father up." It's not fitting for him to sit on the steps. They helped Cornelius to his room with that exaggerated, showy care that hurts the eyes with its falseness. They tucked him into bed, adjusted the blanket. Cassia even brought a glass of water. They were acting out a play of magnanimous victors, and I was their main audience. I watched silently, and they mistook my silence for capitulation. That was their first and main mistake. In the following days, a strange, unnatural silence reigned in the house. I performed my duties with mechanical precision, cooking broths for Cornelius, cleaning rooms, doing laundry. I moved through the house like a ghost, a shadow of myself, and this suited them perfectly. They stopped noticing me the way one notices old furniture. I became part of the interior, convenient and mute. And this gave me what I didn't have before, the opportunity to listen and see. They stopped hiding. They decided they could talk about everything in front of me. After all, a broken spirit is incapable of resistance. One morning at breakfast, while I was silently serving biscuits, Cassia, flipping through some glossy magazine, said to Trevant, "Honey, I've been thinking. That wall between the living room and father's study, it's not load-bearing. If we tear it down, we'll get a huge space, a studio. We can put a white marble bar counter right here." I froze for a moment with the skillet. The wall she wanted to demolish. My father-in-law's desk stood against that wall, where he wrote his last medical journals. Against that wall, Cornelius taught little Trevant to write his first letters. There on the wallpaper, if you looked closely, you could still make out a faint pencil mark, "Our son's height at 5 years old." She spoke of it as if it were just an annoying hindrance on the way to a bar counter. The gracious hostess. Trevant carried himself with that emphasized solidity that was supposed to inspire trust. When we entered, all conversation ceased. All eyes turned to me. I felt their curiosity, judgment, pity. To them, I was the cause of an awkward family drama. Veda and I sat on the offered chairs a little to the side. I was silent. My heart beat evenly. I felt no fear. I felt at home in my archive. Before laying out old documents on the table to restore the truth, Trevant began to speak. His voice was full of sorrow and nobility. He spoke of how he loves and respects his mother, how hard it is for him to see her condition. He hinted at clouded reason, at senile touchiness, at how easily elderly people are manipulated. He never called Vad by name once. He spoke only of this woman, an unscrupulous lawyer who wormed her way into the trust of a sick person for profit. He told how he and Kessia took care of father and mother, how they wanted to ensure a quiet, secure old age for them in the best facility. His speech was calibrated. Every word hit the mark. He painted a picture in which he was a loving, suffering son, and I was a deluded, ungrateful mother. He spoke for a long time. Relatives nodded sympathetically. Partners watched with understanding. I saw the scales tipping in his favor. He had almost won. When he finished, a heavy silence hung in the room. Trevant looked at me with poorly concealed triumph. "That is essentially everything," he said, spreading his hands. "We only want to protect Mom from herself and from outside influence. We are talking about conservatorship. Otherwise, she will do foolish things, deprive herself and father of a roof over their heads." Then Vad stood up. She didn't argue or make excuses. She calmly walked to the table in the center of the room. "Everything Mr. Dubois said is very touching," she began in an even voice. "But let's move from emotions to facts. Facts are stubborn things. Mr. Dubois claims he is acting in his mother's interests, fearing she will lose the house. But here is a document." She took a copy of the forged deed from her briefcase and placed it on the table. The document which Mr. Dubois and his wife presented as the basis of their rights to the house. A document according to which Mrs. Dubois has already lost her home.
She paused.
And here she placed another sheet next to it. It is the conclusion of a handwriting analysis, confirming the signature is forged, and a certificate from the archives of the notary chamber stating that the notary who allegedly certified this paper died 2 years before it was signed. A murmur ran through the room. Uncle Peter frowned, took off his glasses. Trevant's partners exchanged glances. The picture of the loving son began to crack. "These are all insinuations," Trevant shouted, but there was no longer confidence in his voice. "These are documents." Veda cut him off. "And now, with your permission, my client will speak. She does not need conservatorship. She needs to be heard." All eyes turned to me again. I slowly rose. I didn't look at Trevant. I looked at the faces of the people in this room.
"Good afternoon," I said.
My voice didn't tremble. It was the voice of an archivist accustomed to speaking about facts. My son spoke of the legacy of the Dubois family of honor. I dedicated my entire life to serving this family and preserving its history. Therefore, allow me to clarify. I took another folder from my bag. Legacy is not just a house and money. It is primarily memory and truth. Here, I place my father-in-law's letter on the table. This is a letter from my father-in-law, Langston Dubois, to his adopted son, my husband Cornelius. He writes about love, about duty, about nobility. He writes about how he saved an orphan boy by giving him his name. This is the true legacy of the Dubois family. Love and self-sacrifice. I spoke calmly, laying out the history of my family before them like solitaire. I told them the truth, not all of it. I didn't name Orion Thorne. I didn't speak of treason. The honor of the family, even one like this, I didn't want to stain publicly. I simply said that Cornelius was an adopted son, the son of a repressed scientist whom Langston Dubois saved from the system, giving him his surname and his love. Langston left this house to me. I pointed to the copy of the will because he believed I would preserve his spirit, the spirit of a family built not on blood, but on love. And my son, I looked at Trevant for the first time, decided that his right to this house was based on a forged paper. I fell silent, and in that silence everything became obvious. I didn't accuse. I simply juxtaposed 2 documents. On one side, a letter breathing love and nobility. the real history of the family. On the other, a fake deed breathing greed and deceit. I contrasted genuine legacy with entitlement. It was the end. I saw it on their faces. Uncle Peter slowly stood up, walked to the table, took my father-in-law's letter, read it. Then he looked at Trevant with such contempt that he shrank. The business partners silently rose from their seats and, without saying goodbye, headed for the exit. They wanted nothing to do with a man who not only turned out to be a fraudster, but wasn't a real Du Bois. His main capital, his name turned to dust before their eyes. Kessia stood clutching her husband's arm. Her face was gray with horror. She looked at the departing guests, at the ruins of their world. And I think at that moment she hated him. Trevant stood in the middle of the room, completely alone. He was broken, destroyed, and not by a court, not by the police. He was destroyed by the truth which I carefully, like an archivist, had brought to light. His final gambit turned into a public execution he had arranged for himself. He was exposed as a cruel, greedy impostor before everyone whose opinion was dearer to him than life. He was completely and finally broken. I turned and, looking at no one else, walked out of the room. Vad followed me. We silently went down to the street where the cool spring air waited for us. It had never seemed so fresh and clean to me. We didn't say a word to each other. Everything had already been said. 6 months have passed. Autumn has come into its own, painting the garden in gold and crimson. The house has become very quiet. This silence no longer depresses me. It was healing like a cool compress on a wound. It was filled with light penetrating the washed windows, the smell of pecans, and the quiet ticking of the old clock in the living room. Cornelius passed away at the end of summer, quietly in his sleep in his bed. His exhausted heart simply stopped. I held his hand until the very end. We didn't talk about Trevant. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about our youth, about our first date in Forsyth Park, about how funny he looked trying to fix a leaky faucet. We said goodbye. And when he left, I mourned him. Not the husband bearing someone else's name, but my Cornelius, the only man I loved. I buried him next to his adopted father, Langston Du Bois. 2 noble men whose stories turned out to be so closely intertwined, now lay side by side. Trevant was not at the funeral. He and Kessia disappeared. They moved out of the city apartment, selling it to pay off debts I hadn't even suspected. Their world built on the prestige of the Du Bois name collapsed in a single day. Partners turned away. Friends stopped answering calls. The society in which they so wanted to shine expelled them. I heard from distant relatives that they moved to some small provincial town in Alabama, where Kessia found a job as a receptionist in a beauty salon. Nothing was heard of Trevant. He didn't call, didn't write. For me, he simply ceased to exist. Like the ghost I once spoke of. I felt neither gloating nor hatred, only emptiness in the place where maternal love used to be. Today, I went down to the basement, but it was no longer the dark, damp crypt where my rebirth once began. I hired workers. They cleaned it out, whitewashed the walls, installed bright lighting. Along the walls now stood not dusty shelves with jars, but new pine ones smelling of resin. In the center, a large, sturdy work table, my table. This basement, once my prison, became my sanctuary, my personal archive, the place where I finally returned to myself. I slowly laid out old photographs, letters, documents on the table. All my life, I had been the keeper of other people's stories. The history of the Du Bois family, the history of my husband, the history of my son. I carefully collected them, cataloged them, protected them. Now the time has come to collect my own. I took a new album with blank pages in a hard leather binding. On the first page, I neatly placed Langston Du Bois's letter, a document about love and nobility that became the cornerstone of this story. Next to it, I placed a photograph. Not my wedding one, not a photo with my son, but another small black and white one taken many years ago. In it, a young girl with glasses and short hair sits at a desk piled with old tomes, looking into the lens with delight. That was me, Idella, a 20-year-old history student at Spelman College, in love with her profession, full of hopes and plans. The me I had buried myself under the rubble of family obligations and sacrifices. I looked at this girl and smiled. I had been walking back to her for so long. Through 40 years of serving others, through betrayal and pain, through the cold of the basement, I finally found her. I was no longer just a keeper. I became an author. The author of my own story in which I myself decided what was important and what needed to be left in the past. I didn't cross anything out of it. Neither the joy of motherhood nor the bitterness of disappointment. But now I placed the accents myself. I gave events the meaning I considered true. I finished my work and walked to the small high window of the basement which the workers had cut through at my request. It looked straight out into the garden. From down here the world looked different. I saw not the trunks of trees, but their roots going deep into the earth. I saw fallen leaves that would become soil for new life in the spring. I placed a cup of hot tea on the windowsill. The aroma of Earl Grey mixed with the smell of earth and wilting foliage. Steam from the cup rose to the glass, and the world outside the window became a little blurry, like an old watercolor. I took a sip. It was quiet in the house, quiet in my soul. For the first time in many, many years, I didn't feel like someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's daughter-in-law. I was simply Idella, a woman looking out the window of her house at her garden. A woman no longer defined by her past sacrifices, but defined by that calm, conscious future she built for herself. I was free, absolutely, completely, until my very last breath.
Free.
That is where my story comes to an end. Thank you for spending this time with me. If it resonated with your soul, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your feedback is the greatest support for me. I wish you peace in your heart and warmth in your soul. Until we meet again, such a complicated but very deep story, dear listeners. A story about sacrifice, betrayal, and that terrible price one sometimes has to pay for one's own freedom and dignity. It makes you think about a lot, doesn't it? The main question left hanging in the air is the question of boundaries. Where is that line beyond which a mother's all forgiveness ends and the fight for one's own life begins? Did Idella act correctly by destroying her own son's world, even in response to his monstrous cruelty? Was it an act of just retribution or cold, calculated revenge? Each of you, I am sure, has formed your own opinion. Perhaps someone will condemn Idella for her ruthlessness, and someone on the contrary will admire her strength and determination. Perhaps you still have questions about the fate of the characters, or some detail of the story sparked particular curiosity. Share your thoughts in the comments below this video. I am always incredibly interested to read your reasoning and see how differently the same story resonates in people's hearts. Your opinion is very important to us. If this story touched you, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Every like, every new subscriber is a huge support for us and an incentive to continue looking for and voicing new, no less exciting stories for you. It is important for us to know that our work finds a response. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.